The air in the top floor boardroom of Kang Global was thick enough to choke on. Amara Johnson stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. At her feet, a dark, steaming puddle of dark roast coffee was rapidly expanding across the pristine glass table, aggressively soaking into the crisp parchment of a $50 million tech merger contract. Around the table, a dozen executives in tailored charcoal suits sat in stunned, breathless silence. Nobody breathed, nobody blinked. In Seoul's corporate hierarchy, an intern destroying the holy grail of an international merger wasn't just a fireable offense. It was professional suicide. Amara swallowed hard, her deep brown skin flushing with heat, but she refused to drop her gaze. Her mother hadn't worked 2 jobs to get her a scholarship to Columbia, just for her to crumple the moment the stakes got high. She straightened her spine, smoothing down the front of her blazer. "I apologize for my clumsiness," she said. Her voice remarkably steady, despite the adrenaline roaring in her ears. "I will print a fresh copy and ensure it is signed and delivered before the close of business today." A collective, terrified gasp rippled through the room. She had spoken back. Worse, she had spoken back to him. At the head of the table sat Kang Min-Jae. The 29-year-old CEO was a legend of icy efficiency, a man rumored to have ice water running through his veins. Slowly, Min-Jae leaned back in his leather chair, his piercing dark eyes, entirely devoid of warmth, locked onto Amara. He didn't look at the ruined, multi-million-dollar papers. He only looked at her. He unbuttoned his suit jacket with a deliberate, agonizing slowness, pulling back the heavy fabric just enough to reveal a sliver of an intricate, dark tattoo creeping up the base of his neck from beneath his crisp white collar. His large, vein-lined hand tightened around the edge of the ruined contract, crumbling the soggy paper into his fist. Everyone braced for the explosion. They expected him to summon security, to blackball her from the international business world forever. Instead, Min-Jae's sharp jawline tightened. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound in the room was the low hum of the air conditioning. He surveyed her, taking in her striking almond eyes, the defiant set of her shoulders, and the total lack of fear in her posture. Every other person in this building trembled when he walked past. This American intern looked like she was ready to go to war with him. A microscopic, dangerous smirk tugged at the corner of Min-Jae's lips, vanished as quickly as it came. He stood up, his towering 6'3" frame instantly dominating the room. "The meeting is adjourned," Min-Jae announced, his deep baritone voice cutting through the silence like a blade. He turned his lethal gaze directly to Amara. "As for you, Miss Johnson, clear your desk in the intern pool." Amara clenched her jaw, preparing for the worst. "Effective immediately," Min-Jae continued, buttoning his jacket as he stepped toward her, stopping close enough for her to catch the scent of expensive cedarwood and cold iron. "You are no longer an intern. You are my new personal assistant. My office. Now." The executive floor was a minimalist fortress of glass and polished marble, bathed in an oppressive, clinical silence. By noon, Amara's new reality sat neatly arranged on a sleek mahogany desk, positioned directly outside Kang Min-Jae's massive double doors. She was entirely exposed. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the elevator lobby, every passing corporate executive, secretary, and junior analyst peered at her like a bizarre exhibit in a museum. The whispers didn't take long to start. They rippled through the department group chats and echoed in the break room. The foreign intern who ruined a $50 million deal didn't just survive. She stepped into the inner sanctum. To the cutthroat ladder climbers of Kang Global, Amara wasn't a brilliant scholarship graduate. She was an opportunist who had used some unknown, scandalous leverage to bypass years of grueling corporate warfare. Amara ignored the sidelong glances and the cold shoulders. She focused entirely on the mountain of paperwork Min-Jae had dropped on her desk, without a single word of instruction. It was a test, brutal and deliberate. Financial audits from European subsidiaries, legal briefs in dense Korean legalese, and logistical schedules that made no mathematical sense. Min-Jae didn't just want her to fail. He wanted to see exactly when she would break. From inside his office, behind a wall of smart glass that he periodically cleared with the touch of a button, his heavy, dark gaze rarely left her. Every time Amara looked up, she found his piercing eyes tracking her movements, calculating her efficiency, studying her resistance. Instead of crumbling under the pressure of his scrutiny, a fierce, stubborn fire ignited in Amara's chest. She translated the legal jargon manually, reconstructed the broken logistical algorithms, and streamlined 3 separate global schedules before the clock struck 5. When a stack of revised quarterly projections required his signature, she walked into his office, her stride confident, and placed the flawless documents onto his desk. Min-Jae leaned back, his broad shoulders shifting beneath his expensive tailored suit. He flipped through the pages, his dark, tattooed hand tracing the margins where she had corrected a hidden $2 million accounting error in the European manifests. His sharp jawline tightened. He looked up, his expression unreadable, searching her face for any sign of exhaustion, resentment, or fear. Amara stood tall, her natural curls framing a face that held nothing but calm defiance. She didn't offer a meek smile or ask for validation. "Is there anything else, Mr. Kang?" she asked, her voice smooth and entirely unfazed. Min-Jae stared at her for a long, quiet moment, the tension in the room stretching like a taut wire. The golden cage he had built to trap her was proving to be entirely too small for her spirit. "Not for today, Miss Johnson," he murmured, his deep baritone sending a strange, involuntary shiver down her spine. "But tomorrow, we start early." The private dining room of the exclusive Han River restaurant smelled of expensive whiskey, pine needles, and old money. Amara sat quietly at the edge of the low mahogany table, surrounded by elderly Kang Global board members who wore their privilege like armor. They had spent the evening speaking in rapid, dense Korean dialects, intentionally sidelong glancing at Amara as if she were an invisible fixture rather than the woman who had spent 48 hours flawlessly preparing their briefcases. Min-Jae sat at the head of the table, a silent, imposing shadow. He hadn't touched his food. His dark eyes simply tracked the room, his presence keeping the executives on a razor's edge. But as the alcohol flowed, the discipline slipped. Director Park, a bloated man with a heavy gold watch, poured himself another glass of soju and finally addressed Amara directly in heavily accented English. "Miss Johnson," he sneered, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "The internship program used to recruit from Seoul National. I wonder what exotic qualifications a girl from your background possesses to skip the line. Or perhaps the CEO simply prefers a novel decoration outside his office." Amara's blood ran hot. Her hands tightened beneath the table, her knuckles turning ash brown. She opened her mouth to deliver a calculated professional devastation, but before she could utter a syllable, a sharp, heavy click echoed through the room. Min-Jae had set his crystal glass down. The sound wasn't loud, but the entire room froze instantly. "Director Park," Min-Jae said, his voice dropping into a register so dangerously low it made the air in the room feel cold. He didn't raise his voice, but the sheer malice behind it was suffocating. "Miss Johnson corrected a $2 million embezzlement discrepancy in your department's European manifest yesterday afternoon, a discrepancy you signed off on." Park's face was drained of color. "Chairman, If her skin or her presence confuses you, it is because her intellect dwarfs your entire lineage. Min-Jae interrupted, his sharp jawline rigid. He leaned forward, his terrifying gaze locking the older man in place. If I hear another provincial, uneducated syllable, leave your mouth regarding my assistant. I will not just strip you of your shares. I will ensure you and your sons never find employment in this country again. Get out. Park stumbled out of the room, bowing frantically, followed by the rest of the terrified board. An hour later, Amara sat in the back of Min-Jae's armored Maybach, the neon lights of Seoul blurring across the rain-slicked window. The silence between them was heavy, vibrating, with an unspoken intensity. Amara looked over at him. Min-Jae was staring out his own window, his expression unreadable. But his chest rose and fell in a tight rhythm. I could have handled him, Amara murmured, breaking the quiet. Min-Jae didn't look at her, but his hand resting on the leather armrest shifted. As the streetlights flashed into the car, Amara's breath hitched. On his index finger sat a heavy, intricately carved silver ring bearing a crest of a coiled dragon, a mark that had nothing to do with corporate tech, and everything to do with the blood-soaked syndicates of the underground. Nobody touches what is mine, Amara, he whispered, his deep baritone sending a dangerous, thrilling shiver through her veins. Not even with their words. By the following Tuesday, the memory of Min-Jae's silver ring haunted the edges of Amara's mind, but she forced her focus back into the digital matrices of Kang Global. She was analyzing the customs data for a routine electronics shipment destined for the port of Busan when the numbers stopped making sense. A fleet of cargo containers logged as weighing 40 tons of semiconductor components had cleared Port Authority with a registered weight of nearly double that amount. Worse, the encrypted shipping manifest bypassed the standard corporate legal channels entirely, routed directly through a shell corporation registered in Macau. Amara didn't hesitate. She grabbed the tablet, marched into Min-Jae's office without knocking, and slid the screen across his desk. We have a massive smuggling liability in the logistics division, she said, her voice tight with professional urgency. Someone is using our maritime routes to move undeclared weight. If customs does a random sweep, Min-Jae didn't look at the tablet. He didn't even blink. He slowly rose from his chair, his imposing 6'3" frame casting a long shadow across the desk. When he looked down at her, the protective warmth from the restaurant was entirely gone, replaced by a terrifying, impenetrable frost. "Delete the file, Amara," he commanded, his deep baritone flat and unyielding. Amara blinked, her stubbornness flaring instantly. "Delete it? Mr. Kang, this is a federal compliance violation. If the ministry investigates—" "I said, drop it," Min-Jae interrupted, stepping around the desk. He closed the distance between them until she could feel the cold aura radiating off him. His dark eyes burned into hers, heavy with an implicit warning. "You are an assistant, Miss Johnson. Do your job and do not look into things that do not concern you. If you value your future here, you will forget you ever saw those manifests." His fierce rejection didn't scare her. It infuriated her. Amara nodded stiffly, took her tablet, and walked out. But she had no intention of dropping it. Hyper-independent and convinced of her own rightness, she waited. By 11 o'clock that night, the executive floor was completely dark, saved only by the amber glow of the Seoul skyline bleeding through the glass. Amara sat at her desk, the blue light of her monitor illuminating her face as she bypassed the primary corporate firewall, determined to find out what Min-Jae was hiding. Suddenly, a low mechanical hum vibrated through the floorboards. Amara froze. The main elevator bank was shut down for the night. She looked toward the far corner of the executive suite, where Min-Jae's private, restricted elevator sat. The digital indicator above the door wasn't ascending. It was dropping past the ground floor, sinking into the unlisted private sub-basements beneath the skyscraper. A muffled, metallic thud echoed up the shaft, followed by the distant, unmistakable sound of a desperate, choked scream. Amara's breath hitched in her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she slowly stood up from her desk, stepping away from the safety of her computer and moving quietly into the shadows toward the private elevator doors. The private elevator doors slid open with a whisper, revealing a dimly lit concrete corridor that smelled of damp earth and copper. Amara stepped into the cold air of the sub-basement, her flats making no sound against the floor as she followed the echo of a heavy, dull strike. She rounded a corner, hiding behind a thick concrete pillar, and the breath completely left her lungs. The pristine, Billionaire CEO was gone. Kang Min-Jae stood in the center of a starkly lit maintenance bay. His expensive tailored jacket was discarded on a nearby crate, and his crisp white dress shirt was rolled up past his elbows. For the first time, Amara saw them clearly. Intricate, terrifying traditional tattoos of a dragon and a tiger inked in deep blacks and muted reds, coiling fiercely up his forearms and disappearing beneath his collar. Tied to a heavy steel chair in front of him was Director Park's lead logistics manager, his face blooded, gasping for air. Min-Jae looked entirely unbothered, his expression an icy mask of absolute calm as he adjusted the heavy, silver ring on his finger. "Who bought the manifests?" Min-Jae asked, his voice a low, terrifying purr that vibrated through the concrete walls. The man sobbed, spitting blood onto the floor. The Russian syndicate at the port. Please, Chairman." Min-Jae didn't raise his hand again. He simply nodded to a large, silent man in a black suit standing in the shadows, who stepped forward with a heavy iron rod. Horrified, Amara stumbled backward. Her heel caught on a loose piece of gravel, the sharp scrape echoing loudly through the subterranean space. "Who's there?" the guard snapped, drawing a suppressed firearm from his jacket. Amara turned to run, but before she could take 2 steps, a shadow eclipsed her. Min-Jae moved with an impossible, lethal speed. His large hand clamped around her wrist, his grip unyielding, but careful not to bruise her, and yanked her back into the dark alcove. He slammed his palm against the wall right beside her head, effectively pinning her body between his towering frame and the cold concrete. Amara's heart hammered frantically against her ribs. She looked up into his dark eyes, expecting to see the cold calculation of a monster about to eliminate a witness. Instead, Min-Jae was breathing heavily, his gaze scanning her face with a frantic, suffocating intensity. The guard stepped into the hallway, gun raised. "Boss? Leave us," Min-Jae commanded, never breaking eye contact with Amara. "Clear the room." The heavy steel doors shut, leaving them in absolute, charged silence. Min-Jae leaned closer, his scent of expensive cedarwood and raw adrenaline overwhelming her senses. He reached up, his tattooed thumb gently brushing a stray curl away from her cheek, his touch surprisingly warm against her trembling skin. "I told you to drop it, Amara," he murmured, his deep baritone dripping with a dangerous possessive softness. "I warned you, but you are too stubborn for your own good. Now you've seen the monster behind the suit." Amara swallowed hard, her defiance fighting through her fear. "Are you going to kill me?" A dark, breathless laugh escaped his lips. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear as he whispered, "Never. But you belong to my world now, and I am never letting you leave." The transition from her modest Seoul apartment to Min-Jae's sprawling, high-security penthouse felt less like a protection detail and more like an elegant arrest. Located at the apex of a gleaming skyscraper in Gangnam, the residence was a fortress of smoked glass, brushed steel, and silent armed men stationed at every exit. Amara paced the perimeter of the living room, her chest tight with resentment. Her independence, the very thing she had crossed an ocean to build, had been stripped away in a single night under the guise of safety. "I am an employee, Mr. Kang, not your hostage," she snapped that evening, confronting him as he entered the main foyer. Min-Jae didn't stop walking. He unbuttoned his cuffs, the dragon tattoos on his wrists catching the amber ambient light. "The Russian syndicate discovered the logistics leak before I cleared it, Amara. They know someone in my inner office flagged the weight discrepancies. To them, you are not an employee. You are a target I haven't killed yet, which makes you a vulnerability." He stopped, turning his towering frame to face her, his gaze heavy and unblinking. "And I do not tolerate vulnerabilities." Yet, as the days blurred into a tense routine of forced proximity, the clinical armor of the Mafia boss began to crack. Amara watched him from across the vast, quiet spaces of the penthouse. She saw the heavy toll of his double life. The sleepless nights spent staring out over the neon-lit city, the weight of a blood-soaked legacy resting on his broad shoulders. He was entirely alone, trapped in a prison of his own making, surrounded only by men paid to bleed for him. Her anger began to give way to an intrigued, dangerous fascination. One midnight, she found him in the kitchen, quietly bandaging a ragged cut across his knuckles. Without a word, she took the medical tape from his hands, her deep brown fingers contrasting against his pale, inked skin. He didn't pull away, he simply watched her, his breath hitching as she gently wrapped the wound. In that quiet space, she felt the profound loneliness vibrating beneath his cold exterior. The fragile peace shattered 48 hours later. Amara accompanied Min-Jae to the penthouse's private underground parking garage, flanked by 3 bodyguards. As they stepped toward the armored Maybach, the screech of tires echoed through the concrete space. A black van breached the security gate, sliding to a halt as 3 masked men emerged, weapons raised, aiming directly at Amara. Before she could process the danger, a massive weight slammed into her. Min-Jae shielded her body with his own, pressing her flat against the side of the car. In a fraction of a second, his cold composure vanished, replaced by an apex predator's rage. He drew a weapon from his jacket, his arm steady as iron, and fired 3 precise shots through the van's windshield. "Step back from her!" Min-Jae roared, his deep voice carrying a terrifying primeval fury that shook the concrete. "Touch her, and you die." As the remaining attackers scrambled back into the reversing van, Min-Jae turned Amara in his arms, checking her fiercely for injuries, his hands trembling slightly against her shoulders. Looking into his wild, desperate eyes, Amara realized the truth. His obsession was no longer just about containment. It was about survival. The grand ballroom of the hidden Han River estate was a masterpiece of opulence and malice. Beneath crystal chandeliers that cast sharp, fractured light over Seoul's elite underworld, the city's most dangerous figures mingled with corrupt politicians. Amara moved through the crowd like a vision, her deep brown skin glowing against the emerald silk of an asymmetrical evening gown. Her natural curls were pinned back elegantly, and she walked with her chin held high, her striking almond eyes sweeping the room with calm, unbothered intelligence. Beside her, Min-Jae was a towering, lethal spectre in a bespoke black tuxedo. His hand rested firmly at the small of her back, the heavy silver dragon ring pressing warm through her dress. To the world, she was his glamorous American date, a beautiful shield, to hide the fact that he was actively consolidating power. But Amara was refusing to play the part of a passive ornament. When the notorious chairman Shin a ruthless elder syndicate boss, approached them, trying to bait Min-Jae into an aggressive territorial dispute regarding the Busan port compliance logs. Amara didn't flinch. The maritime logistics model Mr. Kang implemented actually cuts transit tariffs by 12% across the East Sea. Amara intervened smoothly. Her voice, a velvety, confident purr. She took a sip of champagne, offering Shin a devastatingly sharp, fearless smile. Reverting to the old smuggling routes would not only invite federal scrutiny, Chairman, but it would also shrink your quarterly profit margins before the cargo even touches the dock. I assume your syndicate prefers liquidity over vanity. Chairman Shin blinked, completely disarmed and utterly stunned by her audacity. For a tense second, the surrounding guards held their breath, but the old man suddenly burst into a loud, booming laugh, raising his glass in genuine respect. Min-Jae didn't say a word. He stood beside her, his piercing dark eyes locked entirely on Amara's profile. A strange, suffocating heat bloomed in his chest, tighter and more terrifying than any obsession he had ever harbored. He watched her navigate the sharks of his world with absolute grace, using her brilliant mind as a weapon, entirely unfazed by the hidden blades and dark secrets surrounding her. She wasn't a liability to be protected anymore. She wasn't just a captive fixation he had locked away in a golden cage. In that fraction of a second, the cold, calculating foundation of Min-Jae's entire life shattered. He realized he was entirely, irrevocably defeated. This wasn't a conquest, it was a surrender. He didn't just want to possess her, he loved her. He loved her fierce independence, her stubborn pride, and the effortless way she stood as his undisputed equal in a world built on fear. You are doing exceptionally well, Miss Johnson, Min-Jae murmured, leaning down so his lips brushed the crown of her shoulder, his baritone thick with a newfound, raw vulnerability. Amara looked up, catching her breath as she saw the sudden consuming devotion burning in his dark eyes. I told you, Mr. Kang, she whispered back, her own heart skipping a beat. I can handle myself. The grand exhibition hall of Kang Global's newest smart tech launch was supposed to be the ultimate triumph, a flawless fusion of his corporate empire and technological dominance. Instead, it became a theater of chaos. Halfway through the keynote presentation, the building's primary power grid violently collapsed. The brilliant holographic displays shattered into darkness, and the piercing wail of emergency sirens drowned out the panicked screams of Seoul's elite investors. Amara was separated from Min-Jae in the sudden, blinding rush of the crowd. Guided by her fierce instinct to secure the proprietary server drives, she retreated toward the backstage tech hub, only to find the security guards dead on the floor. Before she could draw a breath, 3 shadow-draped men emerged from the darkness. A heavy, chemical-soaked cloth clamped over her mouth. She fought back with raw, stubborn fury, striking a heel into a kneecap, tearing at flesh. But the suffocating fumes quickly robbed her of her strength, and the world went black when the backup generators kicked in 3 minutes later, flooding the venue with a harsh, crimson emergency glow. Min-Jae was already cutting through the crowd like an apex predator. He reached the backstage hub, his dark eyes sweeping over the empty room, until they locked onto a single, heartbreaking detail, a scrap of emerald silk torn from Amara's gown, lying near an open service exit. In that exact moment, his personal phone vibrated. A restricted number. Chairman Kang. A distorted voice hissed through the speaker, dripping with the smug satisfaction of the rival Russian syndicate. Your brilliant assistant is currently in our custody at the Intern shipyard. If you do not sign over the maritime customs codes and surrender the Busan territory by dawn, we will return her to you piece by piece. The line went dead, For a fraction of a second, the universe stood completely still. Then the clinical, calculating billionaire persona that Kang Min-Jae had carefully cultivated for years completely evaporated. A raw, primal rage tore through his veins, fracturing his icy composure into 1,000 jagged pieces. He ripped off his tailored suit jacket, tearing the expensive fabric without a care, exposing the fierce dragon and tiger tattoos that coiled aggressively up his arms and neck. His heavy silver ring caught the flashing red emergency lights as his large hands clenched into deadly fists. His breathing was shallow, his sharp jawline rigid with an absolute, unadulterated fury that terrified even his own loyal inner circle standing nearby. "Call the vanguard," Min-Jae commanded, his deep baritone dropping into a hollow, demonic register that sounded like death itself. He loaded a heavy automatic weapon with a brutal metallic snap, his eyes burning with a terrifying single-minded focus. "We are not negotiating. Tell every man under my banner to arm themselves. Tonight, we burn the Incheon port to the ground, and we slaughter every single soul who dared to lay a hand on her." The salty, freezing air of the Incheon shipyard cut through the broken windows of the abandoned warehouse. Tied to a heavy wooden chair, her emerald gown torn and stained, Amara refused to give her captors the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Her hyper-independence flared into a cold, tactical weapon. Alexei, the hulking rival syndicate boss, paced in front of her, checking his watch. "Your billionaire lover is running out of time," Alexei sneered, tapping the barrel of his revolver against her jaw. Amara leaned away slightly, her striking almond eyes narrowing. "If you think Min-Jae is coming here to negotiate a treaty, your intelligence network is as pathetic as your logistics," she said, her voice smooth and entirely mocking. "You demanded the Macau shell manifests, right? Did you even verify the encryption? The moment you try to route cargo through those ports, the International Maritime Bloc will freeze your assets within 4 minutes. You haven't captured a bargaining chip, Alexei. You've just signed your own bankruptcy." Alexei paused, his brow furrowing as her words planted a seed of doubt. Amara kept talking, weaving a brilliant web of fabricated financial data, exploiting his greed to buy precious seconds. She didn't need many. Suddenly, the massive steel bay doors of the warehouse violently imploded. A shockwave of shattered metal and fire ripped through the space. Through the smoke strode Kang Min-Jae. He moved like a demonic force of nature, his rolled-up sleeves revealing blood-spattered dragon tattoos. In a terrifying display of lethal precision, he dropped 3 armed guards before they could even register his presence, his weapon roaring in the enclosed space. In a desperate, panicked move, Alexei lunged backward, wrapping a thick arm around Amara's throat and pressing the cold steel of his gun directly against her temple. "Drop it!" Alexei screamed, his voice cracking with terror. "Drop the weapon, Kang, or her blood is on your hands." Min-Jae froze. The primal rage in his dark eyes suddenly fractured, replaced by a raw, agonizing vulnerability. He looked at Amara, at the bruise forming on her cheek, at her defiant eyes, urging him not to do it. But for Min-Jae, there was no choice. His empire, his territory, his pride. None of it mattered if she wasn't alive to see it. With a deliberate slowness, Min-Jae unclasped his fingers, letting his heavy automatic weapon clatter uselessly onto the concrete floor. He raised his hands, his gaze locking onto hers with a silent, consuming devotion. Alexei laughed, a triumphant, mocking sound. The great Kang Min-Jae, broken by an intern. He never finished the sentence. Alexei's smug celebration created the exact fraction of a second Amara needed. Refusing to be a helpless prize, she slammed her head backward into Alexei's nose. The sickening crunch of breaking bone echoed as he stumbled back, his grip loosening. Simultaneously, Amara kicked her legs out, throwing her entire weight forward to tilt the heavy chair, crashing it directly into Alexei's shins. "Now!" Amara yelled. Min-Jae didn't hesitate. Sliding across the slick concrete, he retrieved his weapon in a single, fluid motion and fired. Alexei collapsed to the ground, dead before he hit the floor. Min-Jae was on his knees instantly, his hands trembling as he shredded the ropes binding her. He pulled Amara fiercely into his chest, burying his face in her curls. She held him back just as tightly, the fire in their blood finally melting into a profound, unbreakable bond. The purge of Kang Global and the Seoul underworld was executed with a quiet, devastating finality. Within 48 hours of the Incheon shipyard raid, the remaining corrupt board members, including Director Park, were systematically stripped of their assets and permanently exiled from the corporate landscape. In the subterranean spaces where the syndicates ruled, the message was equally absolute. The dragon had claimed its territory, and its wrath left no room for survivors. Min-Jae unified the factions under his unyielding banner, transforming the crime family into a highly disciplined, untouchable shadow empire. Through it all, Amara refused to retreat into the background. She concluded her international business internship not with a quiet exit, but by presenting a revolutionary global logistics restructuring that effectively eliminated the vulnerabilities the Russian syndicate had tried to exploit. Her brilliant mind had saved the company millions, and her fearless resilience had saved their lives. She had earned her place at the highest echelon on her own merit, entirely on her own terms. On the day she officially signed her contract as the new Executive Vice President of Global Operations, the corporate office stood in a different kind of silence. The whispers of opportunism had vanished, replaced by a profound, reverent respect. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting deep violet and amber hues across the city, Amara stood in the center of the top-floor executive suite. She had traded her intern blazers for a sharp, tailored ivory suit that contrasted beautifully with her deep brown skin. Her natural curls were free, bouncing softly as she looked out through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows. A heavy, comforting warmth enveloped her from behind. Min-Jae slid his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his broad chest. He had discarded his suit jacket, his white shirt sleeves, rolled up to reveal the intricate dragon and tiger tattoos that she now knew so intimately. On his finger, the silver ring caught the dying sunlight, but it no longer felt like a symbol of a golden cage. It was a promise. "You look entirely too comfortable in my office, Vice President Johnson," Min-Jae murmured against her neck, his deep baritone vibrating with a soft, possessive tenderness that he only ever reserved for her. Amara leaned her head back against his shoulder, her striking almond eyes tracing the sprawling neon network of the Seoul skyline bleeding into the dusk below them. A confident, beautiful smile played on her lips as she placed her hand over his, her fingers intertwining with his tattooed knuckles. "It's our office now, Min-Jae," she whispered back, her voice steady and full of unyielding power. Min-Jae tightened his hold, a rare, genuine sense of peace washing over his sharp features. The cold, dangerous CEO had found his match, and the brilliant, independent intern had found her empire. Together they looked out over the city they had conquered. Equal partners in business, in life, and in the deep, protective shadows that would shield them forever.